The lock jammed again. And she was already there. "Need a hand?" she asked. Like she always knew. I didn't believe in perfect timing, until she kept proving me wrong. Then the letter arrived. And everything I trusted broke. "I've known your name longer than you think," she said. My mother called that night. She knew everything. I had 1 week to choose who I really was. My name is Maya Delgado. And for years I hid the truest part of myself behind lesson plans, church potlucks, and a smile I'd perfected since childhood. This is the story of the woman who moved into apartment 4A, who somehow always appeared exactly when my carefully built walls were about to fall apart. I moved into Magnolia Court on a rainy Tuesday. My life folded into 11 cardboard boxes and a mattress that barely fit through the door. The old landlord had sold the building without warning, and residents whispered about a new owner nobody had actually met yet. She knocked before I'd even unpacked my coffee maker, toolbox in hand, saying my leaking faucet couldn't wait until Monday. "I'm Sloan," she said, wiping her palm on her jeans before shaking my hand, her grip warm and unbothered by grease stains. I noticed her eyes first, the kind of brown that seemed to hold a question she wasn't asking out loud. For 3 days straight, something in my apartment needed fixing, and for 3 days straight, Sloan appeared before I'd finished dialing. My neighbor Priya joked that Sloan had a sixth sense for broken things, though I suspected she just paid closer attention than most people did. One evening she brought over a toolbox and, unprompted, fixed my sticking window while I graded spelling tests at the kitchen table. "You teach kids to spell," she said, smiling. "And I teach buildings not to fall apart. Seems like a fair trade." I laughed for the first time in weeks, surprised by how easily she'd crack something tight in my chest. She left before I could offer coffee, but the next morning a bag of coffee beans sat outside my door. I told myself it was nothing, just a friendly landlord, but I found myself listening for her footsteps in the hallway. Every Thursday became ours without either of us naming it. She'd bring takeout, I'd bring wine, and we'd sit on my fire escape until midnight. I learned she'd grown up in Ohio, the daughter of a mechanic, and had spent a decade renovating buildings instead of settling into one. She learned I taught second grade at Grace Hill Christian Academy, a job I loved but that came with unspoken rules about who I could be. "Sounds exhausting," she said quietly, pretending. I didn't answer, because she'd named something I hadn't let myself say aloud. Slowly I noticed the way she remembered small things, my favorite tea, the way I hated cilantro, the anniversary of my father's death. One night she caught me crying over old photos of my best friend Emma, gone 2 years now in a car accident on I-40. "Emma Whitaker," she said softly, and something in her face shifted, though I was too lost in grief to notice it fully. I didn't ask why she knew the last name. Grief made me careless, and I let her hold my hand until the shaking stopped. We started walking to the farmer's market together on Saturdays, and strangers began assuming we were a couple before either of us corrected them. I stopped correcting them first. Sloan noticed and said nothing, just smiled into her coffee like she was keeping a secret. My chest tightened whenever she laughed, a warmth I recognized but hadn't let myself feel since college, since the last time I'd been hurt. She fixed my radiator on the coldest night of November and stayed after, the two of us wrapped in blankets watching bad reality television. "Why do you always show up right when I need you?" asked, only half joking, watching her face for an answer. "Maybe I'm just paying attention," she said, and the way she looked at me made the question feel far more dangerous than I intended. I started rearranging my Saturdays around her schedule, telling myself it was convenience, not the ache building steadily beneath my ribs. My mother called, asking why I sounded happier lately. I told her work was going well, which wasn't exactly a lie. Sloan brought me soup when I caught the flu, sitting on the edge of my bed reading grading rubrics aloud just to make me laugh. "You take care of everyone," I whispered, feverish and unguarded. "Who takes care of you?" She didn't have an answer that night. I woke to find she'd fallen asleep in the armchair, still in her work boots, one hand resting near mine on the blanket. I watched her sleep longer than I should have, memorizing the line of her jaw, terrified of what that meant about me. At the Halloween block party, she introduced me to tenants as my favorite tenant, and I felt my face burn under the string lights. Priya pulled me aside and asked, gently, if there was something between Sloane and me. I laughed it off too quickly to be convincing. That night Sloane walked me to my door and lingered, both of us pretending the silence between us wasn't full of something unspoken. Good night, Maya, she said, and for one suspended second I thought she might lean in. Then she turned and walked away. I lay awake replaying it, furious at myself for wanting something I'd spent 6 years teaching myself not to want anymore. The next week she avoided me. Busy with paperwork, she said, though I noticed she took the stairs instead of passing my floor. I missed her before I understood I had any right to miss her. An ache with no name I was willing to give it. When she finally knocked again, toolbox forgotten, she said simply, I think I need to be honest about something, and my stomach dropped. I knew your friend Emma, she said. She was my cousin. That's part of why I bought this building. She used to talk about you constantly. I sat frozen, grief and something else colliding as she explained Emma's old letters, the ones mentioning a friend named Maya who deserved better. I wasn't trying to trick you, she said quickly. I just wanted to know the person Emma loved so much before I told you. Anger and tenderness fought inside me. I wanted to be furious, but all I felt was the strange comfort of being known. She used to say you were braver than you believed, Sloane said, voice cracking. I think she was right, even if you don't see it yet. I cried for Emma that night in a new way. Grief reshaped into something almost like gratitude that she'd led me here somehow. Sloane stayed until I fell asleep on the couch, and when I woke, she'd left a note. Emma would want you happy. So do I. I read that note a dozen times before work, tracing the last 4 words until they blurred together on the page. We didn't talk about it directly for days, both of us circling the truth like it might combust if named too soon. Then, at the Thanksgiving potluck downstairs, she reached under the table and laced her fingers through mine, and neither of us pulled away. No one at the party seemed to notice, but I felt it everywhere, my pulse, my throat. The sudden certainty that I was in trouble. Later, on the rooftop, she asked if she could kiss me, and I said yes before my fear had time to catch up. It was soft, brief, and terrifying in the way that only true things are. I pressed my forehead to hers, unable to speak. I've wanted to do that since the faucet, she admitted, laughing against my mouth, and I finally let myself laugh too. For the first time in years, I didn't calculate who might see us, who might tell, what it might cost me to feel this. We kept it quiet at first, careful. 2 women who both understood exactly what visibility could take from a person in this city. I told Priya first, swearing her to secrecy, and she hugged me so hard I nearly dropped my coffee, whispering. Finally, Sloane started leaving her toothbrush at my place, small and unspoken, a domestic intimacy that felt more vulnerable than the kiss had. I began imagining a future out loud sometimes, catching myself saying we before quickly correcting to I, watching her smile at the slip. For 6 weeks, my life felt suspended in something rare and unguarded, like I'd finally exhaled a breath I'd held since college. I should have known better than to trust a happiness that hadn't yet been tested by the people who could take it from me. The test came on a Sunday afternoon, when my mother showed up unannounced and found Sloane's jacket hanging by my door. My mother's face went pale, then hard, in the particular way I remembered from the day I first came out at 22. Whose jacket is this? She asked, though her eyes had already found the answer written across my too quick silence. I told her the truth, finally, after years of half-truths and careful omissions designed to keep the peace between us. I raised you in the church, Maya, she said, voice shaking. This isn't the life we prayed for you. She left without finishing her coffee. I didn't hear from her for 11 days, The longest silence between us since my father's funeral 6 years earlier. Sloan found me crying on the kitchen floor and didn't try to fix it. Just sat beside me until my breathing steadied. I can't lose her too, I said. Thinking of Emma. Of my father. Of how thin my family already felt. The school. Whispers started when a student's parents saw me at the farmer's market holding hands with a woman on North Street. Principal Harmon called me into his office, citing the school's morality clause, and asking if there was anything he should know. I lied. Said Sloan was just my landlord. And hated the shame that flooded me even as relief loosened my shoulders. Sloan noticed I'd stopped holding her hand in public, stopped inviting her to teacher events, stopped introducing her to anyone from my other life. I understand, she said, though her eyes told me the words cost her more than she let on. My ex-boyfriend Daniel resurfaced then, messaging me out of nowhere, asking to catch up, a request I should have refused immediately. I met him for coffee, foolishly hoping for closure, not realizing he'd noticed Sloan drop me off that same morning. Is that why we never worked? He asked, something cold sliding into his voice that I hadn't heard from him before. I didn't answer directly, but my silence apparently told him everything, and he smiled like he'd found a weapon. 2 weeks later, an anonymous letter arrived at Grace Hill Christian Academy, alleging I was living a lifestyle inconsistent with the school's values. I recognized Daniel's phrasing instantly, the same words he'd once used to describe things he disapproved of in our relationship. Principal Harmon called an emergency meeting, saying the board would need to review my contract before the semester continued. I sat in that meeting rehearsing denials I no longer believed in, exhausted by a lie I'd carried for 6 years. Sloan wanted to go with me to the meeting, but I told her, harshly, that her presence would only make things worse. So I'm the problem now? She asked, hurt flashing across her face before she caught it and softened her voice. We fought for the first time that night, both of us frightened and cornered, saying things neither of us fully meant. You want me to disappear so your life stays comfortable, she said. And the accusation landed because some part of it was true. I told her she didn't understand what it meant to risk everything: family, career, community, for a relationship still weeks old. It's not weeks old to me, she said quietly. I've loved you since before you knew my last name. She left before I could respond. For 3 days, our doors stayed closed to each other. The hallway between apartment 2B and 4A colder than it had ever been. My mother finally called, and I braced for another lecture. But instead she asked, hesitant, are you happy? At least. I didn't know how to answer honestly without reopening every wound between us, so I just said, I don't know anymore. Priya found me in the laundry room and confessed something unexpected. She and Sloan had once been married, years before Nashville. She left the closet in pieces trying to make our marriage work, Priya said. I couldn't stay married to someone who couldn't be seen. Felt sick. Recognizing myself in that story, terrified I was repeating a pattern that had already broken someone Sloan loved. She's scared of watching you disappear the way I did, Priya added gently. Don't let fear turn you into someone she has to grieve. I sought Sloan out that night, but her apartment was dark, and a moving truck was parked, absurdly, outside the building. My stomach dropped as the super mentioned Sloan had asked about listing the building, something about needing distance for a while. Panic, calling her number 4 times before she finally answered. Voice flat and guarded in a way I'd never heard. I'm not running, she said carefully. I just can't keep being the secret you protect your comfort with. The words hit like ice water. I asked her to give me time, and she said, tiredly, I've been giving you time since the day I met you. That night I barely slept, replaying every moment I'd chosen safety over her, every hand I'd let go of too quickly. The school board meeting was rescheduled for the following Monday, and Principal Harmon made clear my job depended on my answers. My mother texted, unexpectedly, whatever you decide, I love you. The first tenderness she'd offered since finding that jacket weeks earlier. I didn't trust the message at first, certain it was a prelude to another conversation about repentance and church counseling. Called her. Voice shaking. And she admitted she'd been attending a support group at a nearby church for parents like her. I didn't know how to say I was trying, she said. I'm still trying. I just don't want to lose you while I figure it out. It wasn't full acceptance, but it was more honesty than we'd managed in 6 years, and I let myself hold on to it. Daniel showed up at my apartment building uninvited, demanding I admit the truth to the school myself before he did it for me. Sloane appeared in the hallway before I could respond, standing between us with a calm that barely masked her fury. Leave, she told him, voice low. Or I call the police and every neighbor in this building as a witness. He left, cursing. But the damage was done. My carefully built double life had finally, completely collapsed in front of everyone who mattered. I stood in that hallway, stripped of every excuse, and realized I had exactly one choice left to make honestly. Sloane didn't leave that night. She sat with me on the stairwell, both of us shaking, and asked what I actually wanted. I want you, I said, the truest sentence I'd spoken in years. I just don't know how to want you and keep everything else. You might not get to keep everything else, she said gently. That's the cost. I can't promise it won't hurt. For the first time, I let myself imagine losing the job, the church community, even parts of my mother, and surviving it anyway. I called Principal Harmon and requested to speak at the board meeting myself, rather than let rumors decide my story for me. Sloane offered to come, and this time I said yes, needing her steadiness more than I needed to protect anyone's comfort. The night before the meeting, Sloane grew quiet, and I noticed her hand trembling slightly as she poured our tea. There's something I haven't told you, she said finally. 2 years ago, before I bought this building, I had cancer. My whole body went still as she explained the diagnosis, the treatment, the year she'd spent uncertain if she'd survive it. I bought Magnolia Court after remission, she said, because I promised myself I'd stop hiding from things that scared me. That includes you, she added, voice breaking. Showing up for you was never coincidence. It was the bravest thing I knew how to practice. I understood then why she always seemed to appear exactly when I needed her. She built a life around refusing to look away anymore. I held her that night differently, not as someone fragile, but as someone who'd already survived the hardest kind of fear. I'm in remission, she reminded me, softly. But it changed how I measure time. I don't want to waste it being careful. The next morning, my mother texted that she was driving up from Chattanooga, unannounced, to be there when I spoke to the board. I didn't know whether to feel comforted or terrified, uncertain which version of her might walk through that door. She arrived an hour before the meeting, standing stiffly in my kitchen, eyes landing immediately on Sloane pouring coffee for both of them. You must be Sloane, she said, and the silence that followed felt like it could go either direction entirely. I am, Sloane said, steady despite everything. And I love your daughter, ma'am, more than I've loved almost anything in my life. My mother's eyes welled up, unreadable, before she simply nodded and said, then I suppose we'd better go support her. I stared at her, done, as she picked up her purse like this was simply another Sunday she intended to show up for. The three of us drove to the school in near silence, my hands cold, my heart pounding against the seatbelt. In the parking lot, Priya was waiting too, along with 4 other teachers I hadn't expected, holding coffee in quiet solidarity. We heard, Priya said simply. We're not letting you walk in there alone. Whatever happens in there tonight. Inside, the boardroom felt smaller than I remembered. Fluorescent lights harsh against the folding chairs arranged for the meeting. Principal Harmon read the morality clause aloud first, his voice clinical, like he was reading a weather report instead of my life. When it was my turn, my prepared notes felt useless, So I set them down and spoke without them instead. I've taught here 5 years, I said. I've never once let who I love interfere with how I care for these kids. The only thing that changed is that I'm done pretending otherwise, because pretending was costing me more than any of you realize. One board member, Mrs. Ferris, interrupted, asking pointedly whether this lifestyle belonged in a classroom of 8-year-olds at all. Before I could answer, my mother stood, unexpectedly, and asked to speak, her voice trembling but clear across the room. I didn't understand my daughter for a long time, she said. But I understand a good teacher. And I raised one. If you fire her for loving someone honestly, you're not protecting these children. You're teaching them cruelty is holy. The room went silent. Mrs. Ferris didn't respond, but 2 other board members exchanged a glance I couldn't quite read. Something shifting in the air. Principal Harmon cleared his throat and said the board would deliberate and inform me of their decision within the week. I left that room emptied out, unsure if I just saved my career or watched it end in front of everyone I knew. Outside, my mother hugged me for the first time in months, holding on longer than either of us expected her to. I'm not saying I understand everything, she whispered, but I'm done losing you over things I'm too proud to learn. Sloan waited by the car, giving us space, and when I finally reached her, she pulled me into a hug that felt like home. That night, waiting for the board's decision, felt longer than the 11 days my mother had once gone silent on me. Daniel texted once more, an apology this time, admitting jealousy had driven him to send that letter in the first place. I didn't respond. Some apologies arrived too late to matter, and I no longer had energy to spend on his guilt. 2 days later, the board's decision came by email. My contract would be renewed, though concerns were noted for future review. It wasn't a full victory, but it was survival. And for the first time that felt like enough to build on. Sloan took me to the rooftop that night. String lights she must have hung earlier glowing softly against the Nashville skyline. I have one more thing to ask you, she said, hands unsteady in a way that had nothing to do with cold weather. My heart pounded, half expecting another confession, another secret, but instead she asked if I'd move into officially with her. No more separate mailboxes, she said, laughing nervously. No more pretending the toothbrush is a coincidence. Just actually, fully. I said yes before she finished the sentence. 6 years of hiding finally giving way to something I no longer needed to explain. But even as I said it, I knew one conversation still waited, unfinished. Back in Chattanooga with the rest of my family. 2 weeks later, my mother invited us both to Sunday dinner. The first time I brought a partner to that table since college. My Aunt Ruth arrived uninvited, having heard through the family grapevine. Arms crossed before she'd even taken off her coat. I won't sit at a table with this, she said, gesturing vaguely towards Sloan. Not under your father's roof. God rest him. My mother stood, surprising everyone, and said quietly, "It's my roof now. And everyone who loves my daughter is welcome at it." Ruthin left in a huff, slamming the screen door. And for a moment the whole table sat frozen in stunned silence. Then my mother sat back down, hands trembling slightly, and asked Sloan to please pass the mashed potatoes like nothing had happened. I caught Sloan's eye across the table, and we both fought back laughter at the absurdity and relief tangled together in that moment. Dinner continued. Awkward but real. My mother asking Sloan careful questions about her work, her family, her plans for Magnolia Court. For the first time, I watched 2 parts of my life sit at the same table without either one asking me to shrink. Driving home that night, Sloan reached over and squeezed my hand at every red light. A small ritual we'd never named. Your mom's going to need time with Ruth Ann, she said. But tonight, she chose you. That's not nothing. Maya. That's everything. I realized I'd spent so long fearing this exact scene that I'd never let myself imagine it might actually go well. The following month, Grace Hill's board sent a formal letter updating the morality clause language to remove references to lifestyle entirely. Principal Harmon told me privately that 3 other teachers had come forward after my hearing, quietly grateful the door had opened. I hadn't set out to change the school's policy, but I understood then that visibility, even costly visibility, rippled further than fear ever did. Sloane's remission checkup came back clear again that spring, and we celebrated with a hike up Percy Warner Park at sunrise. At the overlook, she pulled a small box from her jacket, and my breath caught before she even opened it. "I'm not asking you to marry me today," she said, laughing at my expression. "I'm asking you to let me keep showing up." Inside was a key. Not a ring, a spare to 4A, engraved simply with the date we'd met. The day of the jammed lock. "You already have a key," I said, laughing through sudden tears. And she shrugged, grinning. "I wanted you to have a matching one." I said yes to that too, understanding finally that love didn't always announce itself with grand gestures. Sometimes it was simply staying. My mother came to Magnolia Court the next weekend, helping us paint the guest room, humming hymns under her breath as she worked. She still stumbled over pronouns sometimes, still asked careful questions, but she kept showing up, week after week, learning as she went. Priya became a regular at our Thursday dinners too, her laughter filling the apartment with an ease that felt like family expanding. Even Daniel, in a strange final gesture, sent a brief email wishing me well, closing a chapter one no longer needed to reread. I told my second graders that year, carefully, age-appropriately, that families come in every shape, and none of them blinked twice. One student, Lily, raised her hand and said simply, "My moms are married too," and the whole class moved on to spelling words. I realized that the fear I'd carried for 6 years had been mine to release long before anyone else gave me permission. Sloane framed Emma's old letter, the one mentioning me, and hung it in our hallway. A quiet thank you to the cousin who'd started everything. Ruthin came around slowly, sending a stiff Christmas card that year addressed to both of us. Small progress dressed up as normalcy. I finally understood that Sloane's uncanny timing had never been magic. It was simply what love looked like when someone chose to pay attention. We hosted the block party that October, our first as an openly established couple. String lights strung between buildings like the night we kissed. My mother came, bringing sweet tea and Ruthan's old peach cobbler recipe, setting it proudly beside Priya's curry on the folding table. I watched the whole street gather, imperfect and real, and thought about how far we'd come from that jammed lock and rainy Tuesday. Sloane found me in the crowd, wrapping her arms around me from behind, chin resting on my shoulder as the sun set. "No regrets?" she asked. The same question she'd asked the night of our first kiss. Years and lifetimes ago it felt like now. "None," I said, turning to face her fully, finally certain of exactly who I was and exactly who I chose to become. I used to think love had to announce itself loudly to be real, but mine arrived quietly, again and again, in small acts of showing up. Sloane still appears exactly when I need her most, not because of fate, but because she decided, every single day, that I was worth staying for. Vandy.